Hi guys, welcome back to Classic Guitar Rock. I'm Jeremy Lunnan, and today I want to talk about the 5 live albums that I think you should have in your music collection if you don't already have them. Let me say this about live albums, okay? I tend to be not a huge fan of live albums. If I have the preference, I'd probably rather hear the studio version of songs. Having said that, all 5 of these are excellent live albums, excellent representations of the artists. Um, there's a whole debate, right, about live albums. Was it really live? Was this really live? Because guys, it's just fact. Very few of the live albums that you buy are actually 100% live, right? There's typically some things they have to go back and retouch, maybe recut a vocal here or there, fix a guitar solo, whatever. And there's debate about some of these live albums that maybe are any of them live at all, right? I don't know. For instance, one album that's not on my list of top 5, but is actually a great live album, in my opinion, is Kiss Alive. There's a lot of debate back and forth about how live really is that album. And there are interviews with various people that will say, well, they had to redo the drums this, or they recorded this whole track in the studio and added crowd noise, whatever, right? Most of these albums that we'll be talking about today, I think, are, for the most part, pretty live albums, okay? So let's start in order of, well, we'll start at the bottom, right? Coming in at number 5 is Rush with Exit Stage Left. Exit Stage Left came out right after Moving Pictures. So it's a recording of the Moving Pictures tour of 1980, 81. Most of it was recorded either in Montreal or in the UK. And it covers most of the material is from the, Farewell to Kings up through Moving Pictures. There's a track from 2112, Passage to Bangkok is on there. If you are not a Rush fanatic, but know you know that just as a responsible classic rock fan, you need to have some Rush in your library. Exit Stage Left is a good one. Okay, that's a good one. It gives you a good cross section of their music in a live setting, and they do a great job. Sounds awesome. Has, I think, the best recorded Neil Peart solo, in my opinion. Okay, so Exit Stage Left, great album. Coming in at number 4, this is one of those bands that I think is one of the most underrated American rock bands, and that's, of course, Cheap Trick. This album, at Budokan, was recorded between their 3rd and 4th albums. Okay, so right after they had released Heaven Tonight, they went and toured in Japan. They were very popular in Japan. And this was they had like, people treated them like the Beatles when they were in Japan, screaming girls, crowds chasing them. It was like a redo of Beatlemania for Cheap Trick. And this was not happening in the US, right? They had a very small following in the US, even though their first 2 albums are phenomenal. You should own those. But this at Budokan, they're playing material from their first 3 albums. It did so well, they had already had their 4th album, Dream Police, in the can and ready to go, but they pushed the release of that out because of a song that I'm sure you remember, I Want You to Want Me. Well, when I Want You to Want Me, a live version was released, it was a smash hit, right? It kind of changed everything for Cheap Trick. And so they rushed this release of At Budokan out before they released Dream Police, and it was a very, very successful album. Interestingly enough, remember I said at the beginning that I prefer live or I prefer studio cuts over live cuts 90% of the time. The studio version of I Want You to Want Me on the In Color album is terrible. Okay, it's a terrible version. And in fact, when you're used to hearing the great live version that was the hit, and you go back and listen to the studio version, you're like, oh, that's nasty, because it is. It's a terrible version. The live version is way better. In fact, as an aside, one of the knocks on Tom Werman, who was the producer of that album, is it did not represent Cheap Trick well. I mean, it's kind of Cheap Trick is a great live, loud rock and roll band, and the Tom Werman produced Cheap Trick albums are kind of mamby-pamby. It just does not do Cheap Trick justice, in my opinion. But the Budokan album is a great album, and you should own it. Coming in at number 3, Judas Priest, Unleashed in the East. This was kind of my gateway Judas Priest album. This was my introduction to Judas Priest. I can remember when I was in high school in 9th grade, I had a 90-minute bus ride every morning because I lived in the middle of nowhere in Montana, and the bus picked me up at 6 a.m. and I'd get to school no, maybe it picked me up at 6:30. I caught the bus at 6:30 and got to school at like 8, 90-minute bus ride. And we had a really cool bus driver named Glenn that would let us bring music. And other kids on the bus, it's amazing how much music I was exposed to riding the bus, right? So, but one of the albums that one of the kids on the bus would always bring was Unleashed in the East. So if you can imagine a bunch of kids riding the bus in the morning listening to Unleashed in the East, it was awesome. But it's a great live album, high energy. They're playing all their good stuff up to that point, right? And it's just a great, fun live album. Green Manalishi's on there, the Ripper's on there. I mean, it's just a great live album. So go check that one out. Judas Priest, Unleashed in the East. Coming in at number 2, and this one does not get the love it should get. But coming in at number 2 for my money is Ozzy Osbourne's Speak of the Devil. Now in the UK, it's called Talk of the Devil. And I don't know why that difference is. It's kind of like when you go to Canada and try to buy a Harry Potter book. It's not Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. It's Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I don't know why that is. Okay, so anyways, in England, it's Talk of the Devil. In the US, it's Speak of the Devil. Now, funny story here, and this and I'm sure now with hindsight, this is probably a Sharon deal, because Sharon has been Ozzy's manager forever, right? And I don't know this for sure. I'm just assuming, right? But there's a couple reasons why this album was made. Okay, contractually, Ozzy owed, apparently under his contract, he owed them a live album, a live Ozzy Osbourne album. And remember, 1982 was a bad year. That's the year that Randy Rhoads died. They replaced Randy at first with Bernie Tormé, and then with Brad Gillis. And so Ozzy owed them a live album, and he did not want to release, right after Randy died, he did not want to release a live album with Randy Rhoads, okay? So the decision was made that they would record a live album of Sabbath tunes. And here's where the Sharon part comes in, I'm assuming, right? Well, Black Sabbath with Dio was set to release a live album at the same time. And so Ozzy and Sharon probably rushed to release this live album, which is all Sabbath tunes at the same time. And I'm sure they probably did some of that to stick Sabbath a little, I'm assuming. Well, anyways, this was kind of a one-off deal, right? They recorded it over 2 nights at the Ritz in New York City. And I don't mean to cause controversy when I say this, right? But Brad Gillis plays the Sabbath stuff better than Randy Rhoads ever did. That's my opinion, right? Randy Rhoads has said in interviews he was not a Sabbath fan. He did not like playing Iron Man and Paranoid and all that. Brad Gillis, on the other hand, was a huge Sabbath fan, and you could tell, man. And here's an entire concert of Sabbath material, and it's really good. I can't say enough about Brad Gillis's playing on this album. It's a great live album. Now, this is one of those where there's whispers about, well, Ozzy had to go back in and redo all the vocals and all this, and I don't know, maybe he did. I don't care. It's a great live album. If you want a good live representation of Black Sabbath classics, I think you're better buying this album than a live Black Sabbath album. Does that make sense? Because it's just really good, really well done. You got Rudy Sarzo there. You got Tommy Aldridge. It's a good album. So coming in at number 2, Speak of the Devil by Ozzy Osbourne. Now, number 1, again, this is one of those bands that does not get the credit that they deserve. At number 1 is UFO, Strangers in the Night. If you aren't familiar with UFO, I want you to stop this video right now and go to the store or go to Amazon and buy some UFO albums. Okay, UFO, they never broke big in the US, but I have to be careful the way I say this. I get accused of being too opinionated, right? I think if it were not for UFO, there would be no Def Leppard, there would be no Iron Maiden, right? There would be no new wave of British heavy metal, in my opinion. UFO was 5 years before all that. I mean, to the extent that Steve Harris's striped leather pants are a complete ripoff of Pete Way in UFO, right? You watch UFO and you're like, oh, that's where Def Leppard got this look from, or this whatever. And they'll tell you that, right? UFO was very influential, especially to other British bands. And this album it's just an awesome album. Phil Mogg, great frontman, great vocalist. Pete Way, Paul Raymond. It's just a good band. And of course, the Mad Axe Man, Michael Schenker. So Michael Schenker comes into UFO about 73, 74. He'd been in the Scorpions. He's like 18 years old, doesn't speak any English. They bring him into UFO. He and Phil Mogg hated each other. They got in fights all the time, but they made some magic, right? There's several great UFO albums: Phenomenon, Obsession, a bunch of them, right? The live album, Strangers in the Night, which, by the way, was the last album that Michael Schenker appears on because he and Phil just couldn't get along. I love Michael Schenker, but the dude can't get along with people, apparently. Anyways, this album is great, and it's got a few instances. In fact, this is one of those instances where I prefer listening to these live versions more than most of the studio versions. Case in point, a song called Let It Roll. I got the Strangers in the Night album first and then went back and got other UFO albums. And when I listened to the studio cuts, I'm like, wow, the live album is much better. Let It Roll, for instance, sounds way better live than if you listen to it on the album. Lights Out sounds way better live than the album version, in my opinion. But it's just a great album. Michael Schenker, brilliant player, kind of a tortured artist to this day. He's just, you can tell the dude's, I'm not sure he's all there, but he just is a phenomenal player. Everything is so tasty. And you got Paul Raymond, who's really kind of undersung. The guy switches from rhythm guitar to keyboards, back and forth. He's singing background vocals. Super talented guy. Of course, he also worked later with Michael Schenker and the Michael Schenker Group. But UFO, Strangers in the Night, absolutely is at the top of my list for great classic rock live albums. What do you guys think? Am I crazy? Is there something that I left out? I think I did a good job of, obviously it comes down to opinion, it's subjective, but I considered, you know, the 20 live albums that we all talk about. And in my opinion, I think these 5 are the best. So let me know what you think. Share with me what you think your top 5 would be. And if you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, please do so. Thanks, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.